Welcome to the webinar of Policy and Development Advisory Group. PDAG is a social enterprise working at the intersection of public policy, research advisory, and strategic communications. PDAG's work aims to drive a people-centered, evidence-based public policy approach where ideas become action and enable impact at scale. We are on a transformative journey to enable positive change through collaboration, cooperation, and cohesion. Before I move on to the context setting and introduction of our esteemed guests, there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar. Please do fill it out and let us know your thoughts and suggestions about the topic and the future webinars you would like to see. Finally, you can sign up for the PDAG newsletter alerts for our future webinars and events on our website. PDAG's webinar series, Ways Public in Public Policy, aims to facilitate a series of exciting conversations to inform the policy discourse on some of the most pressing challenges on sustainability, equity, and social inclusion. This series will particularly focus on key ideas, debates, and frameworks to reimagine a people-centered approach in formulation and execution of public policy pathways, particularly in climate change and just transition, labor markets, internal migration, governance in undeserved regions, and sports for social impact. Today's webinar, Crafting Climate Narratives, Reporting and Storytelling on Climate Migration and Just Transition, will be a discussion on the nuanced aspects of impactful storytelling techniques and reporting matters of climate change, focusing not only on disseminating accurate information, but also on developing narratives that inspire actions towards a just transition, while exploring the intersectionality of climate change with gender, rural development, and social justice. Our discussion will further aim to analyze the role of media in shaping public perception of climate migration and just transition, highlighting the importance of responsible reporting practices and ethical storytelling. Now, I would like to quickly introduce to our panelists. Pawanjot Kaur is a journalist, creative producer, and filmmaker based in Melbourne, Australia. With over 9 years of media experience, she has contributed to prestigious outlets like Financial Times, Al Jazeera, DW, and The Wire. As a Pulitzer Center 2023 grantee and one World Media 2022 fellow, she is dedicated to spotlighting stories on climate, labor, gender, and social justice. Her recent impactful documentary, Can There Be a Just Transition from India's Coal Industry, published by the FT, explores community-driven initiatives for equitable energy transition in Jharkhand. Our second panelist, Aishwarya Mohanty, is an independent journalist and a researcher hailing from Bhubaneswar, Odisha, with a rich background in covering rural issues and climate change for over 5 years. Her focus on gender, caste, and marginalized communities has led to impactful reporting for esteemed outlets such as Indian Express, Frontline Outlook, and Mungabe. As the author of the article, No Crops, No Brides, How Rising Sea Levels Are Killing India's Coastal Villages, published by the Migration Story and then later published by the Guardian, it showcases her commitment to shedding light on climate-induced migration along Odisha's coastline. Now, I would like to invite Pawanjot for her comments and discussions for the webinar.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, PDAG, for having me at this webinar and for this platform to share our film within the public policy space. So I would just begin by showing a 57 seconds trailer of the film to all our attendees. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
इस क्षेत्र में कोयला
Thank you. So this is a story from 3 districts of Jharkhand. It's based out of Dhanbad, as we know that it's one of the oldest coal mining regions, and it's based out of Ramgarh. Ramgarh is also one of the oldest, but also currently facing in the last 1 decade, facing mine closures at a large scale. And the third story is based out of Bokaro, which is one of the big coal mining areas, especially for power generation in the region. I'll begin by sharing why this story, why these regions, and why these characters. So the 3 characters, I mean, for people who've watched the film, the 3 characters from these 3 different regions. One is a computer teacher, Vinod. The other one is a social worker in the region. She works on gender. Her name is Sushma Devi. And the third character is Sashi Kumar, who's an entrepreneur in his village. And he started a business, a fishing cooperative business out of an abandoned coal mine in his region. So why these people and why this story? So just a tiny anecdote on. So this was around 2021 when there was news about India committing to slowly phasing out coal, and that was also the time when I was in Jharkhand, and I was finding ways of pursuing stories of labor out of the state. And I was visiting villages with friends who were working on documenting energy transition. And one of the most key things that I kind of noted and connected with the whole larger international story that was going on was that India is unique, and of course this region is unique in terms of the sheer number of informal economy that runs around the coal mines and in the coal sector. And so when I started meeting with communities, I first realized that the film or the story that eventually will, whatever form or shape it takes, it has to capture this complex reality that India has with coal. The necessities of this country around coal, in terms of livelihoods, in terms of jobs, in terms of the economy and revenue. So with keeping the development point of view of India, of not only India, but also Jharkhand. And again, not just Jharkhand, but even the villages where my characters were staying and the communities they are staying. So keeping in mind the sheer necessity of development for which we need the fossil fuel, unfortunately, and the whole framework of discussing how to move beyond it needs to be captured. So that was one of the things. And when I slowly started meeting with communities and interacting with them, so this was a process of almost 2 years interacting with people, researching, reading reports. So I was educating myself along the way because I was reading policy reports. I was engaging in events that are talking about an energy transition. So it was a learning curve for me, attending these conferences and meeting with communities together. So when I met with them, a majority of them, there was a sense of moving towards more dignified forms of work. That was definitely one of the sentiment that came across, that there is an ambition, there is an aspiration to move towards dignified forms of work, but what, right? So that's where there was a sort of a limitation. And then having met with people, interacting with different social backgrounds within one village, interacting with miners, mostly from the other backward class community, the OBC community, and then meeting with some of the community change makers within that village, some of them who had they had a sense of they were in their own capacity doing social work within their village, and they were so. And when I engaged with them on the issue of an energy transition, although not everybody, and that's there even in the film, that when you talk about just the word transition or energy transition or just transition or coal transition, nobody, I wouldn't say nobody, but a majority of people uh, wouldn't want to engage with it, or wouldn't be interested in engaging with it, or they don't understand it. And there is no, and how I like to also say it is that there is no translation of the word energy transition in the native language of people who are dependent on coal, not just dependent but reliant, where their economies are reliant on coal. So there is, how do we talk about the issue in the language of the communities is one. So there is no language at the moment to to engage with communities on this issue. So there were people who were trying to make this language accessible. So those people were Vinod and Gulab Chandra in the film, and Sushma for that matter, and even Sashi. So these are the people who are trying to bring that language to their own community. And that's how I started narrowing down on characters. And like I said, I was also reading policy reports, and some of the things that had that were there on paper, I saw them on the field. So for example, in Vinod's story, the computer center, the generational dependency on coal, and the lack of avenues to move beyond it because of generationally low income levels, was what I saw with Nindya and Vinod's interaction. When Nindya goes to the computer center, she tries to learn, but there is this first there is an intergenerational dependency on coal, and because there have been low income levels for, I don't know, decades now, that moving beyond that is still a challenge. So how do we address that in the context? How do we turn that into its head for an energy transition in that region? And then the layer of gender was, of course, it was there in India's story. She's a 17-year-old girl, and her story, she aspires to learn technical skills. She aspires to sing, and that is but there are patriarchs in the village who want her to get married off. So how do we protect the aspirations of young girls and fit that into an energy transition framework? And the other aspect of gender was, of course, there in Sushma's story, because she runs a training center for women, which she runs annually, sometimes for months, or for weeks sometimes, or some years she's not able to do it, but she aspires to have a permanent training center for women, try to run a cottage industry out of it and link women's products with markets. But the challenge she faces is extremely layered, which again was something that I had heard from scholars and academics studying energy transition, that there is, of course, there is women, there is no skill. Of course, we talk about upskilling, but we also how do we convince so I'll tell you this anecdote. I'm unable to frame it, but so when I share the anecdote with you, so when I met with women, they said that we go to the mine, we load the trucks, and we get 500 rupee per day. And even in the film, one of them says that this is what we do, this is what we are good at, and we don't want to spend months learning stitching and tailoring and all of this stuff and forego the money that we will get for the day's job. And the issue of a lack of belief in in Sushma's work of the women, that she won't be able to get a CSR fund for this, she's too ambitious. And so she is trying to get a CSR fund to run a training center for us, but it'll take months for her to do it, and then for us to join her. We don't want to forego. So this belief that this is what we do, this is what we're good at. We don't want to move to different forms of work. And even if there are more dignified forms of work, this is something which is comfortable to us. We'll just go, we'll spend 5 hours at the mine, load trucks, and come back. So this is the tension that got captured in Sushma's story of women finding financial security in this form of labor, in this work, and talking to them about how can we do something that is beyond coal work. Sashi's story, I think one of the things, Sashi, and I mean, as a filmmaker, even as a journalist or director, you get biased towards some of your characters, and it was a very challenging thing for me to get biased towards one or the other. But I truly believe that what Sashi is doing is extremely marvelous, and it's an extremely scalable model to promote an extremely different alternate form of livelihood in a coal mining area. The challenge at the time, 2 years ago, when I was filming with him, was that he did not have a no objection certificate from the coal company to fish on that abandoned mine. So there was no NOC from the company which owns the land. And in these 2 years, he worked towards getting the NOC. The fishery department of the region helped him do that. So, and there were tests run on that water, if fish from that water is good enough to be consumed. So I feel that if there is this engagement of different stakeholders within that region, of the fishery department, of the coal company that owns the land, of people like Sashi, Sashi has aspirations to take some of these abandoned mines to make them even boating spots, tourist spots. And this is not new. We've heard of this on paper. We've heard on this on, we've heard from researchers that something like this can be done. How can we engage with coal companies to, say that, okay, it fits all the bills, it fits, how can we work together to do this? And now just one last thing, I'd conclude by talking about the role of journalists and role of media since on reporting, especially on just transition stories, is that the first thing is that especially on the issue of a transition, because it's a global issue, India is still figuring out. We know countries in Europe who've completely begun transforming, making policies and engaging even deeply. So because this is a like I said, it's a global issue. Journalists or communicators should, I think one of the things should be to engage with diverse stakeholders. The stories should be engaging enough for diverse stakeholders to come on board, and journalists should be made part of that stakeholder community now, and because with, I mean, like I said, so journalists, why I say that journalists should be also made an important stakeholder is because we are seeing hostilities towards journalists across the world, and that limits journalists' capacity, reporters' capacity to first cut across their, I mean, of course, the stories that we do, we aim to reach it to wider audiences, but because of the hostilities that journalists face, or the circumstances around the world that are there with journalists' work, it limits our capacity to engage with different kinds of stakeholders, and vice versa. So if my stories are not read by people sitting, administrators or Indian administrative services people, it loses some point or the other. And I'm talking especially about the issue of a transition, because this is a polycrisis, like we talk about, right? And this is something that everybody's hands on to find solutions, to find different avenues that are well informed, that share knowledge from each other's sector, that shares knowledge with the private sector, with the government, with the public policy advocacy sector, with the journalists together in one room, probably. And I think that's where I think that should be the role of journalists and the role of the larger community to accept journalists to become part of the talk, right? So I'll conclude with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Pawanjot. The comments were really insightful and enriching, especially how the characters came to life and how they were developed and your first-hand experiences on the ground. We will discuss further in detail in the Q&A session. But before that, I'd like to invite Aishwarya for her comments and discussions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Pooja, for having me here. So I have a small presentation. It's mostly photographs that I've taken on field while covering climate change and its impacts across Odisha. I moved to Odisha in 2020. I've been reporting on climate change since 2021. So I think more than me talking, the visuals will. This was the very first story that I reported from Sadbhaya, which is in Kendrapada. It wasn't a very new story. Sadbhaya has been reported on again and again. You can see one image where you can see that hand pump which is buried in the sand, and there's a temple. And this village, actually, there were a group of 7 villages, and it was a happy, lively place. But in the 1960s, the mangrove plantations in this area was cut because there was a port coming up in Paradeep. And it was in 1960s that for the very first time, there was a visible impact of sea erosion in this region. Now there are no villages here. All the 7 villages have been rehabilitated to another place, but that rehabilitation began only around 8 or 9 years ago. And we still have a few families, they're mostly landless families, and there has been an issue around how can you rehabilitate them because they do not have a land patta. So there are still a few families which are not very close to the sea, a bit far away, but still inside that peripheral area, whereas the others have shifted out. I mean, you take a boat ride to first reach that part of Sadbhaya, and then it's a bike ride. It's almost a 2-kilometer, 3-kilometer bike ride to reach the coastal area, like closer to the sea. So this was like the very first instance in Odisha also where people started talking about sea erosion, where people started talking about the impacts of sea erosion and how villages were disappearing and how people were being impacted. These are a few more images very close to the sea. So now from Sadbhaya, around 530 families have been rehabilitated and they stay in Bagpatia, which is like almost 7 to 8 kilometers away. And in 2023, they announced that the state government will build India's first resettlement colony. Not that they did not have a colony earlier, so it was called the rehabilitation colony, but the state government realized that there are not enough facilities, that something which also we have been talking about, that there are not enough facilities there and people need more basic amenities in a place where they stay. So they came up with the idea of building India's first resettlement colony. We're still looking forward to it, how it materializes and what goes into it. These are a few images from Puri. This is from 2022 when there was a delay in monsoon. So if you know that Odisha, during monsoons, most of the rain-fed agricultural areas, there's a lot of paddy that is sown. So the farmers had to delay their sowing season, and it was in the first week of August. Usually it's in July, but because monsoons were delayed, so it was first week of August. But then we had a low depression and cyclone, and there was unseasonal, there was rainfall and there was cyclone. So there was cyclonic storm and rainfall. So all the farmlands got inundated, and these are the farms where they had just sown the saplings, but everything was damaged. So in this case, again, most people that I met in Puri across villages had to migrate out to look for work during that season. In Odisha, there are two types of migration. One is a distress migration that we also call seasonal migration. So during monsoons, they generally come back to their villages, and whatever the land they have, they cultivate crops there. But in this case, most of the people who had come back couldn't harvest anything because all their crops were damaged. Now, for a 1 acre plot, if they have to re-sow the saplings, they had to buy a set of 80 saplings from another farmer. And the calculation was like around 8,000 per acre that they had to reinvest again if they had to cultivate paddy. So most of them actually thought that it's better to go out, maybe to Bhubaneswar or to other state where they can do the contractual labor work again. So that season was dull for them. There was no sowing that happened in that season for any of those farmers in Puri. Now, if we look at, there's just some statistics from 2019. If we look at these cyclonic storms and the floods, in 2019, we had Bulbul and almost 222,000 hectares of farmland crops were damaged in Odisha. In 2020, we had Amphan, and that was 3,400 hectares of land. In 2021, we had Cyclone Yash, that was 5,700 hectares of land. And then we had this. So when there are repeated cyclones and when repeatedly the land is damaged again and again, people opt for migrating out. So again, in Sadhya also, we saw that it was damage of houses, it was damage of livelihood, and people migrated out. In this instance also, where there's recurrent flooding, where there are recurrent cyclones, people migrate out again for livelihood. The next, again, pretty known, these are images from Ramya Patna in Ganjam. This is a very recent story that I did for India Spend, and these impacts are very much visible to the naked eye. Like anybody who goes there can see these damaged houses, can see how the sea erosion has impacted the people. Now, these people here are fishermen that depend on the sea. Sea is like their other home. They've been on the sea for most part of the day, for most part of the year, for most part of their life, catching fish. That's their traditional source of income. But now, because of this, they had to rehabilitate again to another colony that's almost 7 to 8 kilometers away again from here. And because they are so much farther away from the sea now, most young men tend to migrate out for work. So the traditional occupation of fishing no more exists per se. So the idea of rehabilitating people from one place to another, while it is necessary, it's also important to look at the loss of livelihood that happens because of it. It's also important to look at how people are changing from the traditional livelihood practices to something very new or very different. So these are issues which are very much visible in Ganjam. A few more images. This is also Ramya Patna in Ganjam. This is on the towards the Andhra border. So you see a lot of people who speak Telugu. And another issue that they keep telling us is about the declining fish catch in the region, where they tell me about, when I visited this place, they told me about how they had certain fishes, species of fishes, which were very prominent, but now they're not able to find them. Even when they go deeper inside the sea, they are not able to find certain species of fishes at all. This was a fish catch center, which was developed by the state government district administration. And now, they're not able to use it at all. This is Podampeta. This was one of the first villages in Ganjam where the impact of sea erosion was very much visible. Again, they have now moved to a rehabilitation colony, and they'll now be voting from very different booths. The entire village is divided with the elections coming up, and they'll be voting from very different places, from very different booths. And this was the very recent story that I did. So Odisha has almost a 470 kilometer coastline, and I have been traveling across to look at the various impacts, the humanitarian impacts that climate change has. One of the stories that I did way back in 2020 was also on how these repeated cyclones impact the gynecological health and well-being of women and how there's a gendered division when it comes to accessibility to health or the impacts on the health of people. So this story happened because we were traveling in Puri, and we had been looking at livelihoods and we've been looking at the larger impacts. But as journalists, it's also very important to zoom in to look at very micro dynamic impacts that are happening on ground. So when we went to Puri, we wanted to look at, here you don't find those very visible impacts of broken houses, or, the sea very close, or there are no villages, or people don't tell you that the village was here and it has moved away. But there is an impact, and that impact is a very, very layered change in the social fabric of the community that lives there. So there are like 3 villages here: Udaykini, Kandahar, and I'm not able to remember the third one. So when we visited these villages, you can see that closer to the sea, the forest department is now has undertaken a plantation to mitigate the impacts of sea erosion. But if you visit this village and you drink a glass of water, you will realize that how saline the water is. The salinity has seeped in completely, which has destroyed the fertility of the soil, which has made drinking water very, very difficult for the people there. They've kind of gotten used to it, but the impacts here are as such that they don't have guests anymore. People don't come in here to stay. If they come, they bring in their own bottles. They don't stay here beyond a day or a few hours. So if there's a marriage, if there's any kind of celebration, people don't come in and stay here. If they do, these people barter water for, say, paddy or anything else from their village, from other villages which are 10, 15 kilometers away, so that the water is potable. I mean, they can drink that water. It's not as saline. Apart from guests, the other thing was brides. So if you go there, you will realize that there are a lot of bachelors in their early 30s, which is generally not a case in most of the rural areas here. But men have been having a problem in finding brides, because most of the families who probably come here, if there's a match that has been fixed, they come and visit the village. Their only concern is, how will our daughters survive drinking this water, bathing in that water? Because women, they'll be using the same water for cooking, for bathing, for everything. And what kind of impacts would it have on her health? Probably skin ailments. How would she survive? So when we interacted further to understand that how they're dealing with this, we realized that migration happened gradually, first for livelihoods. But initially, here, the entire idea of, say, intercaste marriage or marrying outside the wish or the will of the family was not allowed or permissible, so to say. But now when I talked to the older generation, men and women, and they were like, we don't have these barriers anymore. We really want our kids to get married. So if they go out to work, if they find somebody there, we're more than happy to have them as our daughter-in-laws, rather than sitting here and waiting that somebody we like, or we find out and they get married. So for most men, it has now become this idea that they go out not just looking for jobs and livelihood, but also looking for a match. And some of them still have this confusion. Some of them still have this apprehension that, someday we will go back to our village because that is our homeland. So what then? How do we tell our wives or future better halves that this is how it is going to be? This is what the problems are. Now, this village is very far from being, noticed also, because the problems have just started, and there are no assessments that have happened the way they have happened, say, in Ganjam or Kendrapada. So the people, they have this constant thing that, do you want our houses to be washed away first for us to rehabilitate to a place? The emergency here is still seeping in. Like I said, if you drink a glass of water, which I did, you will understand the kind of problem that has come here. And there are a lot of issues on health. There are a lot of skin issues that have come out. But still, there's no There has been no assessment here. There has been no plan in place to rehabilitate them. There has been no initiation of a discussion around it also. So I think that's where we come in, where it's important that when we are looking at migration, there has to be this information in the public place, public space, sorry. And this information is required for us. This information is required for people in public policy also, so that this migration becomes seamless. I mean, we look at other larger stuff also. So when we are zooming into the micro dynamics, it's also important to zoom out to look at the larger possibilities and what can be done. So yeah, these were my stories, and this was the final story. And lastly, when you visit these places, we talk about very larger terms like climate refugees and climate migration. Migration in Odia is we call it Dadan. But when you visit these places, they don't talk about Dadan, because Dadan is distress migration happening in, say, Balangir, Kalahandi, where people go to bricklins and work. In Ganjam, for example, people go to Surat, that's aspirational migration. But here, there's a repeated question that I get asked whenever I visit. They're like, oh, what did we do to anger the sea? Like in Odia, they asked me, humne kya kiya tha ki samudra humse itna naraz hua hai? And I think that has always stuck with me, because it's a very important question. They don't look at things like we do. Like I said, they don't understand climate migration, climate refugees. They understand that the sea is angry on them and they are moving further away. They have lost their livelihood. They have lost, the age of marriage, fresh drinking water, and whatnot. And they probably don't have an answer to why it is happening and how it is happening. And as journalists, I think it's important for us to look at these very human aspects of it. And I think that's what will make climate storytelling more relatable, even for people outside sitting and reading about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Aishwarya. This was really amazing and thank you for taking us through the detailed photo essay and also explaining us the process of researching and climatic reportage on complex issues such as climate change and social justice. So I'll now open the space for the Q&A sessions. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A chat box, as well as some of the questions were submitted to us pre-session for the panelists. So for Pawanjot, my first question is, how do you navigate the ethical consideration of storytelling when representing communities affected by climate change, ensuring their dignity and agencies are preserved while still conveying the urgency of the issue on hand?
Thank you for the question. I think how it must be done, I won't comment on that, but I'll share how I try to do it. One of the things was taking ample amount of time to keep visiting villages, chatting with them, and living. I mean, I lived with Sushma for a week, so I think it was mostly spending time. So I know a lot of time journalists don't have the privilege of time at hand, and of course money, but even time, I think, because we can't spend days. But I think to build trust with the communities, because we are outsiders clearly in their space, and there is always an ethical question in all journalists' mind, that what do we intend to do with all the information that we take from a community? How do we preserve, like you said, the dignity of the community? So I think building trust, having clear, open, transparent conversations with the community, that this is where the story will go, this is what we intend to do with the story, and this is how this portion of your interview is going in the film. That happened. I mean, we did one of that, but that was also because we had some of the some of the parameters that some of the publishers usually also want. They want consent forms and they want, open, transparent dialogue. So I think at an individual level, building that trust with people you work with, report on, and having a transparent communication that this is where the story is going and this is how we will be able to amplify this and this and that, so having that. So I think that is one thing that I did, and I'm still in touch with Sushma and everybody, mostly Sushma because we became pals, but even with everybody else. So I think, yeah, that would be one thing.
Thank you. No, that's actually really important. And considering the direct impact on the communities, I think this has large impact and has been an hindrance for crafting storytelling techniques, and especially for filmmakers and journalists on the field. So thank you for that. Aishwarya, we have a question for you from the chat box. Climate change language is complex and academic and inaccessible to those who are most affected by it. How did you navigate the challenges of communicating these complex concepts of transition with the communities you were reporting on? And did you see any efforts from government bodies or NGOs on the field to address them?
Hi, thank you for this question. It is actually a very big challenge because when you visit the ground, like Pawan mentioned, that it's very important that you spend time with them. So when you spend time with them, you can also see the changes or how they're spending a day. So when you look at how they are spending a day, you're able to craft your questions better. I think so. When you observe them, when you look at them, you have an understanding how fishing communities work. Okay, so you have that understanding. Now you sit with them, you spend hours with them to see how they are going about their day. How do they navigate these changes in climate, which you understand from your perspective because you've read academic papers, you've spoken with experts, right? So when you see these changes and when you see that this is probably different or how it is happening, then you draft your questions and then you approach them. So I tend to do this because I cannot sit and tell them ki, sea erosion hua tha and how it happened. So when I sat with them, Ganjam, I asked them that this part of the wall is broken. I first we narrowed down on who used to stay in the house. We approached them and we were like, how did this happen? And they told me that they were sleeping at night and they heard, they were like कि समुद्र की आवाज हमेशा आती थी पर उस रात तेज आई, right? So they're like, we can hear the sea every time, but that night it was different and that scared us. And subah tak we did not have that wall. The sea had come in and it had washed away that part of the wall. So these are very small things that they talk about, but these are things which make this issue relatable to readers. So I think our questions should not be very should not have those jargon words where we talk about larger things or very scientific terms, but very basic things, very day-to-day life things, and how these changes are impacting them or what kind of change they have witnessed. So I think that helps bring out the story that we are looking for.
Yes, absolutely. I think I completely agree with you because it has to be community led and they have to be at the forefront because it is impacting to them. So I completely agree to the fact that the readers would also relate to it if community is speaking and their representation is central to the whole story that has been crafted by the certain reporter or a filmmaker. On a follow-up question to that, I think there's a question for both of you. So both of you have contributed to prestigious media outlets. How do you navigate the balance between telling compelling stories that capture readers' attention and also at the same time ensuring the accuracy and integrity of the reporting, especially when we look at the matters of climate change and the certain terminologies that is not understandable to the local communities or the people that affects them the most?
Want to go first, Aishwarya? Okay. So I think this is just part of our job. Yeah. I mean, I think if someone tells me, how do you do this? That's our job. We have to do this. We have to make, I mean, it's part of our KRA, you know. So if this is, you tell the story that reaches wider audiences, but also maintain accuracy, because you're informing so many people who may not be informed. So, you know, the other day I was showing this film to my sister, who is completely in a art and culture space. She works in that, and she's you know, she's not informed about an energy transition, and I have to inform her. So my story has to be informed, but also you know, also not just inform her, but accurately, because that the responsibility rests on my shoulders. And, you know, journalism, like I said, you know, it's a ethics, rooted in ethics, this kind of job, you know, that so we have to, so this is something that constantly on our minds for every story that we do, that it has to be engaging. So especially so in engaging, so the way we edit the film, so we have to, so instead of bringing the point at the end, we bring the point at the start, so that it's engaging, you know. So and then have, so with independent journalists, I think one of the challenges that we sometimes in the independent media landscape, we try to collaborate with fact checkers to help us fact check our story. Sometimes we don't get fact checkers, sometimes we are doing fact checking also. So yeah, I mean, it's important and a bit challenging for the independent media journalist space, but this is constantly on our mind to be accurate and to make it reach wider audiences.
To add to it, mostly because I completely agree to what she said. So if you look at her film, she mentioned about 3 subjects. When you read our stories, there are probably 2 quotes, but it's not like we go to the field and speak to just 2 people or 3 people. We speak to a very wide, range of people on the field also. So when one person, like this common thing, ki barish ho rahi hai, so if one person say it's raining, for us, it's also like we have to talk to 10 other, 12 others in that periphery to realize and understand that, you know, it is a common phenomenon. It's happening there. So it's very important to corroborate the facts that we are telling. To tell a compelling story, we cannot give up on accuracy or factual correctness of the story. And that also comes from the fact that we do tend to speak to many more people to understand the issue at hand better, how it's impacting the community at large. So that happens. And also when there are issues and we pose questions to say government officials or district administration or anybody, the questions are also crafted keeping this in mind, and their quotes are also taken. So that is one way of maintaining the balance or corroborating the facts.
I think, yeah, that actually is something which is very spot on and should be a reflection to a lot of people who aspire to be in this profession, but you know, backs off because of certain hindrances that they think that they will not be able to achieve. So I think that was one of the reasons for us to conduct this webinar also. For explaining firsthand of how the process of reporting and researching should take place, considering at the same time the ethical consideration for the local communities. Before we close this session today, I would also like to ask you both, what do you hope audiences will take away from your respective works on climate migration and just transition? And how do you envision these narratives shaping public discourses and policy action in the future?
Okay, so I'll go first on that then. I think the fact that I'm here today talking, you know, at the PDAG platform is one of the intentions that I had while making the film 2 years ago, you know, while I began doing it, when I was filling forms for grants. You know, one of the things was that I intend to take it to spaces where policy is being framed on energy transition, and there's in a very good way a lot of work being done in India, in universities, you know, in IITs, in otherwise. So I think so I'm glad that one of the intentions is happening today. We are doing this. And in policy action, I mean, I think the story of communities and what's happening, the grassroots mobilization that's happening, um, uh, it would be great that if their initiatives are further funded by people who want to fund energy transition, or further taken to avenues where we talk about how to upskill, how to generate alternative livelihood. So there are these ready I wouldn't solutions to an extent, but the ready avenues beyond coal work that are there, and these can be scaled, and maybe Vinod, computer teachers like Vinod, can further be trained to train even more people. And initiatives of Gulab Chandra, who is having these stakeholder meetings with panchayat leaders, with trade unions, with all of these people, this can be scaled, this can be taken to regions outside of Jharkhand, or so I think that is the action. I mean, as journalists, we've done the story now, it's out there now. If it reaches the right people, and if impact and action comes from there, that's something which is the ultimate goal. I'd say that, yeah.
Again, adding to what Pawan just mentioned, I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's important to bring out this information and also the solution through the work that we do, to navigate this entire space of climate migration, to make this movement more safe, to make the destination more accessible. So the intention always is that, stakeholders, like people involved in public policies, take this up and look at it from their lens and make this movement seamless, make this movement safer for them. But there's also one thing that I always do. Actually, one of the Ganjam stories that I did, I took my mother and my brother along because I wanted to see, I wanted them to see and what's happening. We as individuals also have a lot to do. I mean, you, I, irrespective of whether we are journalists or people in public policy spaces, we have a lot to do as individuals where we can contribute to this entire idea of climate change at large. So whenever I report from these rural heartlands, the idea is that my friends sitting in Gujarat and Surat can also read about what's happening in a very coastal district of Odisha, in Kendrapada, in Ganjam, and in Puri. And probably they bring in some changes in their day-to-day lives, I don't know what kind or to what extent, but probably they do. So I share these stories widely with my friends and family, trying to explain to them also that, this is a larger picture that's happening because of climate change. Apart from the water crisis that you look at in the urban spaces, there are these heartlands which have been suffering and for like decades now. So that is more of a motto for me always. That has been a motto for me always. So
absolutely. I think, yeah, the personal motivation and the, the idea of converting into policy changes and the kind of research that goes behind it, I think this matters a lot. And finally, I would like to close this session. I think there are further questions in the Q&A box, but I would encourage if the audience member can share them with us directly, and we will get our esteemed panelists to respond, and we'll share back the rewards from them due to the paucity of time today. But again, Aishwarya and Pawanjot, thank you so much for your availability and for your time today. These are the topics that are not yet discussed largely in the public discourse, and we wanted this to happen on a larger public platform. Thanks for your time. For the audience's member Thank you again for joining us live today. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And the recording of this session would be available on PDAG social media channels shortly, as well as the YouTube channel. So please feel free to share it further, especially for the budding journalists and researchers in this space, especially working on climate change and such climate complex topics of social justice. Finally, you can sign up to receive PDAG newsletter alerts for our webinar and events on our website. There's a short survey for your feedback once the webinar is ended today. Thank you so much for your time today, and
Thanks a
please
lot.
stay tuned for our next webinar in the series, where it's Public and Public Policy by PDAG. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
a lot.
you.